Hi, and welcome back to the Live Life Balance podcast. Today, I am super excited to have Joscelyn Kate on. And we don't really know each other all that well, but I have been following her a little bit, and she's got some really yummy, juicy, good information I think that we're all going to be able to learn from. And so, without further ado, how are you doing this morning?
Hi, good. How are you doing? Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm doing great. Um, as we kind of get started, I just would like for all of us to get to know you a little bit better. So if you would like to just give a little bit of an intro as far as who you are and kind of what led you down the path in which you are taking right now.
I am a recovering codependent people pleaser and perfectionist. And through my recovery, I became a master mindfulness practitioner, a trauma-informed yoga instructor, and a certified ritual guide. And those educating myself through those three things is really what helped kind of maintain my path and maintain my healthy habits, because obviously with what I was struggling with, especially the people pleasing and the perfectionism, it can be easy to fall back into those habits. So I really needed sustainable practices that were proven to work to keep me, on a better, healthier path in creating healthier relationships.
I love that. And something you just said, which I think probably a lot of people's ears just perked up, was the people pleasing perfectionism, right? I feel like at some point in our lives, most women, I'm not going to say all, but most women fall into one of those two categories, if not for a long period of time, for little glimpse at least to see, hey, that's not working for me. And
Mhm.
I think one of the biggest things when you are recovering, like you said, is finding those modalities that you can actually implement regularly, because without those practices, and it will look different for everybody. And I love how you found a few different things, because that just shows that it's not a one size fits everybody. It's kind of, you
Right.
got to take and choose the pieces that work for you.
Hmm.
But in hearing you say all of that, one of the things that keeps kind of resonating in my mind is boundaries. In order to not be a people pleaser, in order to not fall into that perfectionism, trap,
Hmm.
boundaries are huge. So could you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
your take on all of that?
Yeah, and I think the struggle, the biggest struggle when you are trying to set those boundaries, especially as a people pleaser, is having a practice to manage suffering and disappointment, having a practice to address, the way that other people might feel or project onto you. And when we're setting boundaries, regardless of what your issue is, setting boundaries can be a very difficult thing. And so often it is difficult because you don't want to disappoint people. And we don't want to disappoint people. We don't want to disconnect from people. We don't want to hurt people. And so navigating that kind of maintaining relationships while, serving your own needs and serving your own health is a practice. It's always a practice. And, having gone through all of those trainings, I think, people could see me as somebody who's like, got it down pat. I'm all set. I know how to do boundaries, but I still get the fight or flight feelings. I still get the sensations in my body. And what I've come to recognize is that it's really about embracing that that's how my nervous system works and being able to work through it. And so accepting that setting boundaries for me is going to create that fight or flight, and then having a practice to respond to the fight or flight, and then persevering through what I need. Like, do it scared. That's what I tell myself. So when I need the boundary, and I know I need the boundary, and I'm an overthinker, so if I've thought it through and I've decided it, I know I need it. It's really about managing the discomfort that comes from disappointing other people. And that's the biggest practice that I have to keep working at, is that some people are going to be unhappy with your boundaries. Some people are going to villainize you. Some people are going to violate your boundaries anyway, and you're going to have to change the relationship. But continuing to revisit practices to manage the suffering and the disappointment and the discomfort is really how you can maintain like healthy boundaries.
I absolutely like, I mean, I have the chills, and there's so much, because what I just love that you just said is you're not going to fix it, right? You're not going to have a practice and no longer have those feelings. You're going to learn how to manage the feelings. And recently I heard something, and I can't remember who it was, so I can't quote them because I would, because it's so like it was such an aha when I heard it, is that, whether you have boundary issues, whether you have, perfectionism, challenges, whether you have um, anxiety struggles, you kind of have to get in a mentality of like having that come along with you, because you're
Hmm.
never going to get rid of it. And so the
Hmm.
analogy that this person made was like, yeah, you can come drive in the car with me, right? You can come along, but you're going to sit in the back. You're not
Yes.
going to drive the bus anymore. And so I think that's where there's such a disconnect in traditional medication and traditional thoughts
Hmm.
of health and wellness, is because it is not just take a pill and it goes away. It
Hmm.
is sometimes you need a pill to manage it to get started, but you're always going to be
Yeah.
managing it. It's something that's part of you. And so accepting
Yes.
that and understanding that it's how we were created, and to stop
Hmm.
trying to like fight against it. I think
Hmm.
so many people would have such like an aha revelation moment. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, okay. So
It's
you're
so much
shaking.
about, and I like teach so much about your self-care practices cannot come from a place of self-rejection, and they can't come from a place of self-loathing. And when you want to eradicate your anxiety, when you want to eradicate your perfectionism, you're self-rejecting. And when you embrace that you developed perfectionism tendencies literally out of a place for love for yourself. When you see that, you're like, oh my God, that piece is trying to love me. It's not helpful. And I can discern that. But it really is coming from the desire to help you be accepted and connected and loved. And so when we are stuck in these perfectionism cycles, it's not because we're bad people. It's not because we want to control everybody around us. It's really truly because we want to be safe and we want to be connected. And when we thank those pieces of ourselves, when we say, have gratitude for the fact that our anxiety is showing up out of a place of love, then we can say, but please sit in the back seat. That's where you
Right.
belong, because my higher self can manage the feelings, because I'm not feelings and I'm not my thoughts, and my highest self can manage through what I experience. But it's so much like, when we develop practices that are about self-rejection and self-loathing, they're not sustainable. And that's what happens when people think that they're going to eradicate their anxiety. It keeps coming back, and then they start to feel like a failure, and then they start to, it's damaging to their inner relationship, it's damaging to their inner trust, because they think, well, I can't stick to it, I can't do it. But it's not about eradicating it. It's really about just that ongoing embrace and saying, oh, here I am again, but I know how to manage it.
Yeah. And I also think, another thing that doesn't get brought up enough is that when our body goes into these different things, whether it's, the people pleasing mode or the perfectionism mode, or, it is our body signaling something to us, whether that is, this is not working for me and I need to get my tool belt out and figure out which tools I can actually apply,
Hmm.
or it's like, hey, this is who I am, right? And I'm not going to feel like sorry that I am a certain way, because this is who I am. And
And
I
it's
think
about
sometimes,
building that care community that has the capacity for what your needs are, because your needs are fine.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes when we get caught up in the minutia of society and what society tells us we should be or we shouldn't be, or
Hmm.
how we should, do something, that it gets the train of thoughts going wild in the mind, and we forget to come back to, God created us a certain way. He gave us these characteristics for a reason. You know, are they all beneficial to us? Absolutely not. But are they there for a reason? They're there to show us that there are other opportunities for growth by implementing some of the tools that I think you have. Which, so when we're talking about mindfulness, I think for a long time it was a buzzword.
Mm.
And being mindful means, oh, I love everything, and oh, everything's great, and I'm so mindful I can just float through the day. Well, I mean, obviously
Right.
that's really not the case, but It would be great, I guess,
It
maybe, I don't
sounded
know.
like a magic pill. I think that's how people were kind of selling it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So when someone is first kind of dipping their toe into the mindfulness practice, mindfulness is different than meditation. That's the first thing I want to kind of say.
Yeah.
So when you're teaching people the very basics of mindfulness, can you describe what mindfulness actually means? And then
Mhm.
maybe one or two things that people can do to try it on to see if it would be
Yeah.
something that might, be a shift for them.
Yeah. So I think one of the key elements to understand, and this is where I usually try to start with people, is recognizing that mindfulness is different than awareness. And and awareness is really where we are. And I think it's so funny because we have so many mindfulness practices that are about um, expanding our awareness. But awareness is really about addressing each moment that you're existing in, physically existing in. So when you're aware, you can be aware of, sense, what you see, what you can touch. But mindfulness is being aware of all of the moments that you can be aware in. So, for example, you were a toddler, you were a child, you were a teenager, you are an adult, you will be an old person someday. And right now, you're aware of who you are right now, but you can also be aware of all of those other stages that you're not in. So, those are other frames of time along the trajectory. So, when we're talking about mindfulness, mindfulness is being aware of all of the moments of awareness. Awareness is being present in the frame that you're actually in. So
Okay.
collapsing time and space, and this is how we can disconnect from our feelings, is collapsing time and space is how we can see that we were a baby, we were not born, and then we were born and we were a baby, and we are existing as we are now, and someday we will be old and then we will die. And we could imagine ourselves as like a genie stepping outside the earth and just looking at the planet and seeing that like flicker of light of ourselves not having been born, living our lives, having died. And when we see it, the entire trajectory, that's being mindful, because now you can look at, where was I an hour ago? Where am I right now? Where will I be in an hour? And when you do that, you can recognize that your life is like a cruise ship. You are like steering a cruise ship, and you can't just bang a left turn with a cruise ship. You really have to tick the helm 1 degree. And as you're moving along, you have that powerful control over ticking the helm the 1 degree. And you can say to yourself, in 3 hours, I want to be, 42 degrees north or whatever. But it's going to take you 1 tick each time. And that's crawling the frames of awareness. That's the 1 tick is each time that you're aware. But the entire trip is the mindfulness. And so we have to be aware of the fact that our mind has no parameters. There's no guardrails. We can just make stuff up. I could tell myself I'll be a millionaire tomorrow, and I'll get caught up in this, in the thoughts around how that could happen or how it couldn't happen. I can tell myself all these stories, or the opposite. I can tell myself I'm going to die tomorrow, and then I get all scared, and it causes me to create certain behaviors or act in certain ways. But the reality of it all is that everything happens 1 tick at a time, one frame of existence at a time. And so to be mindful, we just want to look at the whole trajectory, step back from the moment that we're in, and see every moment along the trajectory. We can then say, okay, I want to be a millionaire in 5 years, and actually literally create the plan to get there. But we can't say, I want to do it tomorrow. So when we embrace that kind of powerlessness, that's how we can separate awareness from mindfulness, where we recognize that awareness is where we have power in each moment, but we don't have power along the entire trajectory outside of each moment that we're in. Practicing mindfulness for me is so much about stepping outside of the moment and seeing that it is along a line of multiple moments.
Hmm, that's so good. I, I need just kind of a second to like digest all that, because it's so true. And the whole time you're talking about the ship and the 1 degree, it is basically what I teach people in health and wellness, which mindful, all of that is part of
Exactly.
health and wellness. It's like you can't wake up today and want to, eat one piece of lettuce and then, drop 100 pounds. It just, and then pounds aren't even everything. I'm just making an example. It's just not
But
possible. But
four
could
weeks
you?
go by and you still don't see the results. You have to know that it's not going to be 4 weeks. It's going to, you have to be realistic along their trajectory. Like, how long does
Exactly.
it take,
Right. And what are you willing to put in place, and what are the steps in which, and those steps are the shifts, right? Those steps are what it is that you're actually doing. So when it comes to mindfulness, I'm kind of reframing that in my mind a little bit. And one of the things that I'm hearing, and you can tell me if this is accurate or not, is that when we look at the whole trajectory of our life, right, and we look back at those younger years, um, and some of the things from childhood, and people call it childhood trauma and things like that. A
hmm
lot of stuff from childhood, though, pre a certain age, we were not in control of, right?
hmm
Though there,
hmm
we were kind of just along for the ride, because before you're a certain age, you just don't have the wherewithal, you don't have the brain capacity. There's so many, you're just not mature enough. I mean, there's
But
just
there's a
so
lot of
much.
conditioning happening
But
because you get
I was
conditioned
just
from the outside world.
100%. So like, I think it's theta state, like 0 to, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something like that. But it's like you're
hmm
being conditioned along those ways by things that you're seeing and how you're being treated, and what you're seeing around you and all of that. But then it's like when you fast forward to like 40 or 50, some of those conditions have come along with you. However, now, if you can look backwards and see on that timeline that those are things that were out of your control, then you can start to step into a different type of behavior, a different type of shift to get away from, to not totally eradicate them per se, because it is part of who you are, but
Right.
understanding that that's part of who you are, and maybe it's not working for you. And so now we have the ability and the capacity and the brain expansion to be able to say, I know that happened, and this is how I am because of this particular incident, or because of, this is just kind of what I learned along the way. But now that I'm
hmm
here, I'm seeing there's a whole world of different stuff. And so now I can be more aware, I guess. And
hmm
that awareness that I don't want to have those things from my past or my mindful like trajectory,
hmm
basically, now I can start to implement different things, which are
I
the
think
tools and the
I think
shifts.
that people struggle in this place, exactly this place you're talking about. I think that people struggle so much with the direction of empathy because
Mm-hmm.
when this happens, when we look back, especially, and I was in therapy for 3 years weekly. I worked on my own childhood trauma. I was in couples counseling with my husband. So we've done the whole, you know, pulling back the onion on the childhood thing. And it is so difficult to look back and not make excuses for your parents or not make excuses for your caretakers, because that's what we tend to do, is that we tend to, we're an adult now, maybe you have children, maybe you're, have a high power career, whatever, you have a lot of things going on in your life, you understand stress as an adult, and you empathize with things that your parents maybe did or things that caretakers the ways that they did things. And in certain moments, you might find yourself saying, well, this is why they did frozen chicken nuggets every night, or this is why they said nobody can ever be famous, or whatever it was that created your trauma, and we find ourselves empathizing upward. And the most important thing in my own wellness coaching program is that I say that the empathy needs to flow laterally and down. That is the healthiest way to empathize. And so it is so important as a parent that I do not access empathy from my children. Of course, they're humans. They're going to naturally tend towards empathy and sympathy in various situations. But it's my job as the guide, as the older one, to protect them from letting it flow upward, because that's where we get stuck in the toxic conditioning, where we say, like, well, it happened for a reason, or, it's difficult to get out of because of this reason. And that's a big thing with eating healthy and poverty and food prep and time. And people get caught up in these stories, and it's because their empathy is going towards where their conditioning came from. And really, we need to shift to empathizing with the child that was experiencing the thing. So, okay, maybe your parents said, "No, it's not. You're never going to be a famous football player. Nobody becomes famous football players. It's so rare," and like that hurt you. Don't empathize with them saying it. Remember when you were 6 or 7 or 9 and how much it hurt your feelings, and empathize with that child, because that's how we
Mhm.
really can pull out the shift and break away from the conditioning that happened. When we empathize with how the conditioning occurred, we keep these like strings and we stay stuck in it, and it can revisit too often. When we break free from empathizing in that direction, that's when we're more easily able to recognize the conditioning that comes up. And like we said, it's not about self-rejection, it's just about keeping it in the back seat, and you can keep it in the back seat when you keep the empathy in the front seat.
Wow. Okay. My gosh, that's so good. That I've never heard it spoken that way, but man, that's so good because, my own personal, processing, I'm thinking to, just different things or whatever. And it's like, I have learned to be empathetic towards myself and whatever it was, but I also have always said, my parents did, people did do what they can with the tools they have until they have better
Mm.
tools. So
And
that's,
I'm not a big fan of that messaging. I know that's
yeah,
so controversial, but I am not a big fan of everyone's doing the best they can. I am somebody with my own lived experiences. I am somebody who, experienced my own toxic habits and patterns because of my perfectionism, my codependency. And I think that, people are doing what they think they have to do. And I think that we like to say we're doing the best we can, but what we're often doing is doing what we think we have to do. And that comes from stories. It comes from the stories that we tell ourselves. We kind of box ourselves into things. We have expectations, or we want to control more than we actually can control. And this can cause us to box ourselves in and take actions, like especially as a codependent, especially as a perfectionist, that is really actually harmful to other people and toxic for other people. And really to like keep it focused inward. Like that's like I to keep my empathy on myself, I always keep focusing on what happened to me along my entire trajectory of my life. And I keep that, on my line, so that doesn't go to my parents and it doesn't go in the wrong direction. Like some people have older siblings or other caretakers or whatever. And a lot of the reasons that will come into empathizing is because we see like maybe they have addictions, or maybe they have other problems in their lives, and we'll say somebody with an addiction, they're doing the best they can. I'm not a fan of that because
I think, oh, so let me reframe that. Cause I think when I say doing, so when I see people that may have conditioned like a younger child at that
through bad eating
moment,
habits. Yeah.
right? But at that moment, that is all they kind of knew because I feel like a lot of times those tools were not really a thing. And
Yes.
so when I say doing the best they can, what I think I'm trying to actually say is they did what they knew based on either their past or what was kind of present. Because back in, let's say, the 80s, because that's kind of my first, like, if you were overweight, you went on a diet, right? Like that
Right.
was so in our
Right. Right.
family, food was never talked about except if you were overweight and you needed to go on a diet, which I never experienced that. So I was kind of out on the outside looking in, but like I remember my grandmother, she was always on Weight Watchers and she was always talking about
Same.
losing weight. And,
Yep.
and I was sitting over here going, I don't understand that. But, at that moment, that is all they knew about healthy eating because there was not a lot of either from what they grew up in or it just really wasn't in the social like mainstream of like what they were supposed to do, I
And
guess.
this is what I
Yeah.
was going to say, is that people, they kind of resign these choices to the masses, where they
Mhm.
say, well, I don't know what healthy eating, or I don't know what good budgeting habits are, so I'll just go with, whatever the buzz thing is right now. and
Correct.
and this is where I push people, because I say, and this is, people say, like, I exactly as you're saying, I'm doing the best I can with what I have, or my mom did the best she could with the knowledge that she had. And my take on that is, we're never we're never given permission from the universe to stop learning. Like, the universe has never said you're done with growth, so you're all set,
Yes.
you have answers. So it is incumbent upon us to always be growing and learning, and to be absorbing that information. And I think when people decide that they have the answers, they're really resigning the trajectory of their lives, their
Mhm.
decisions, their
Yeah.
relationships to other people. They're kind of outsourcing their decision making processes. And I'm so much about self-empowerment, and especially coming with a people pleasing background, a lot of things I wanted approval for. Like, I want to get approval before I do this, I want to get approval before I do that, or make this decision, or buy this gift. And it's so much about wanting, like, agreement and approval from other people. And when we're seeking agreement and approval, we are suppressing what's coming from within. And it's
Yeah.
so important to really meditate on what's coming from within, because
Mhm.
we always have the answers. And I mean, this is funny, because we'll talk with my kids. I do a meditation with my kids called the owl, and it's to build self-trust. And my 7-year-old, she's so bright. She's like, I know my owl doesn't know how to do it was like some surgery thing we were watching on Doc McStuffins. And she's like, I know I asked my owl doesn't know how to do that. So my owl doesn't know everything in the world. And I said, well, but your owl knows who to ask, right? And she's like, yeah. So, like, that was the whole point, is that when you go into trusting yourself, like, you can say, does this feel right? Is this in alignment with me? And if you have an inkling of, no, I don't think it is, maybe it's not, don't suppress it. Don't push it down and go get someone else's approval. Like, really dig in, meditate on that piece, because we always know what exercise regimen we need. We don't need a trainer to tell us. We always know what healthy food is for us. We don't need a nutritionist to tell us. Like, once and this is what I mean. Like, I know that not everybody knows that, you shouldn't eat bananas 4 times a day, every day, whatever. So you're going to go, like, as I was talking to my daughter, you're going to go to the surgeon, and they're going to have gone through lessons that you didn't go through, and they're going to guide you. But the whole point of that is that you always want to go to the inner trust first, and you want to ask yourself, is this the best choice? And we and we live in a fast-paced world, and we have so much going on. We don't want to always be making choices for ourselves. So it can be easier to resign to the masses and say, well, everybody's on Jenny Craig, that obviously works. Everybody's on Atkins, that works. But then this is what we find out, is that time goes by and the Subway diet didn't actually work.
Right, exactly. Well, it's so interesting you're saying all of this because again, like I'm just of course thinking from a personal perspective, but I don't most people who know me know I don't go with the masses and I come from a seeker of learning and I'm always trying different things
Love
and
that.
trying on things for and honestly it was my children that kind of shifted my mindset in
Same.
that type of environment and I didn't grow up with that so obviously I am trusting I did trust what felt right at the time for me. And something that I do try with my children, which again was a learning process because I knew what I knew until I started learning different things, to be honest. And
And you're
so
open to
as
it. That's a big key.
well, correct. But it's like
Yeah.
as I started learning, I'm like, okay, I don't have all the answers. Of course
Right.
I don't. And so a lot of that kind of I've been hoping and like kind of implanting into my children is that I am your mother and I know a lot, right? And I want the best for you, but I do not have all the answers. And so sometimes my job is to help you seek the answers from external places of people who have different wisdom and different gifts that I might not have. And so we can all learn together. And so
Mhm.
again,
And then
that was a
discerning that,
shift.
because it's so much about like gathering in all the information and then as like
Mhm.
a team,
Sure.
picking it out, helping it align within the family, helping everybody's needs be met with the new information or whatever. And that's how I approach information so much, is like it is not a fix. It's not a solution. When you go out looking for answers, it's not because you're going to come back and be done with your work. It's just gathering more pieces so that you can keep like kneading your reality into
Yes.
into what you want.
One of the things you said though, is you're not, like what healthy food is, but the problem in our society is there are many people that don't, because of listening to the commercials and listening to the front of the boxes of things,
And
and
not
really
their
not
body.
without their body, and also not having the knowledge or the education piece to make the best choices. And as a coach, as somebody who's more on the holistic side, when people come to me and they say, how do I lose weight? My first response is, we don't prescribe a diet. We're going to prescribe whole foods. We're going to find out what works for your body. You're going to find out. You're going to experiment. You're going to be doing the food log. You're going to see how you feel after you eat this versus after you eat this.
And
It's
that is
all,
like the biggest piece, is like, because when you're going with what's the fastest dinner to prepare, when you're going with what has the least ingredients, what's the cheapest, you are not tapped into how do I feel an hour later after I ate dinner, because you've accomplished your goal. You got the fastest dinner done. So now you're sitting down an hour later. You don't know why you feel like crap. It's like people like don't even connect that they
yeah.
feel that way because of it's the meal that they just had. And that's like when we listen to our bodies, that's where our body says like, no, that's not the right drink. You shouldn't be having that. No, that's not the right food. And then the
But
coach is where you go
sometimes,
and say like, what do
correct.
I do?
And
Because I was conditioned this way and I have no
yeah,
idea.
the support piece, I feel like, is what a lot of people need. It's not because
Right.
everybody can go out and learn, everybody can pull the information. But I think also our bodies are really wise, and they're also wanting to, it is wanting to be, as kind of like stay in homeostasis as long, and so it actually, I'm just going to use soda. I don't know why it just popped in my mind, but somebody who is a soda drinker, right? They're a soda drinker. Well, their body has kind of shifted and mutated kind of, and so you don't even know if something's wrong, that's actually what it is. And so a lot of times people don't recognize the feelings for eating until they pull the stuff away. And
Right.
so sometimes it is not a diet, but it is doing the elimination steps to
Mm-hmm.
pull back stuff to then reintroduce, so that you can get a true picture of how your body responds to things. And that is not just food, it is also stress, it's also relationships, it's
Yes.
also all
I
the
was
things.
just gonna say that is absolutely, especially when you're dealing with childhood issues, it is so, so important to take space from everything that conditioned you in childhood for some period of time. And that's not to say like everybody needs to cut their family away. And I know that that's such a fear for people and they feel so guilty doing it. But exactly what you're talking about is that we need that kind of elimination process so that we can see what is activating my nervous system, what is creating more anxiety or stress. And when we give ourselves space to listen to the signals, that's when we really can amplify them and meet our needs and truly actually find that kind of calm place where we can live in each moment without feeling that urgency of what we're doing wrong or what we need to be doing differently, or are we living our lives the right way. You really come into peace in each moment when you give yourself the space to listen to your own body signals.
Yeah, I had an experience. I was actually just telling my daughter this the other day when we were walking. Um, my household was always loud when I grew up, and it wasn't that everybody was mad at each other. It was just the tone that everybody used, and it was like who could talk over who. It was like dinner was just like it was a lot of talking. My family, my mom is Italian, my dad is Jewish, so everything is just loud, And it wasn't until I went away to college and I lived with my
Yeah.
first roommate, and I was like, wow, this is so interesting. I don't have to talk loudly for her to understand or hear what I'm saying or whatever. And I remember coming home for that first Christmas break, and my stomach would just get in knots. And I was
Right.
like, wow, gosh, that's so crazy that I'd go back to school and everything would like calm down.
Because
And
it's like this
it,
mind buzz. It's like this undertone of a buzz that's
yeah,
happening when
it
you're
was just
exposed to that, right?
exactly. But then when you're pulled away from it and you see something different,
Right.
then it was like, oh, my body actually likes that a little bit better. And
Right.
so, it is, again, it is never, well, I don't do that anymore because sure, there are times when I retreat and am loud. There are times when those things come back and it doesn't make it right, wrong, or a difference. I just notice it now. I
Yep.
notice and I tell my kids, communication, we all have to learn different communication styles. And just because, we're teaching you one way, as you guys grow into who you are, your communication style might be a little bit different, and that's okay. And,
And they'll build their care communities, and that's
exactly,
totally okay. Like whatever your care community is, that's going to be like personal to every individual. And that's like
100%.
feel the same. I want my kids to know to listen to themselves and completely feel comfortable differentiating from the way, my husband and I are doing things or the way that we
Exactly.
believe things.
Sure, of course. And I think just stating that out loud to them really gives them power, um, an empowerment feeling to like, oh, my kids are a little bit older, they're 17 and 20. And so, they're really starting to kind of dabble in their own self, and like coming up with those
Yeah.
things. And the one thing I have said for many years again is like I don't have all the answers, so I have to create you in a way to seek those answers for yourself or the wisdom from other people. But what
Hmm.
I have also learned from being a parent, which probably fits in this realm some way or some, as far as boundaries goes, is, we can teach somebody all day long something, but until they themselves want to implement it, want to see how it goes, they might do what you say because kids are conditioned to do that, which is something
Right.
I learned along the way of being a parent and also a
Hmm.
child. But ultimately, there comes that clipping of the wings. It's like you've got to give them the space to mess up, to try
Hmm.
on different things, to say, you know what, I used to not be able to eat dairy, but I'm whatever, and so I'm going to eat it now, and I'm going to, and maybe not have a reaction, and then 6 months later, well,
Right.
you got all this stuff going on because
Yeah.
you chose that, and it's
But
okay.
that's their natural learning curve so that it sticks
Exactly.
for them, so that
a
they
hundred
carry
percent
their self-care differently. And that's like, it's so important that we allow people to build the self-care from within so that they trust
Yes.
it, because they're not
Yes.
going to trust it if they're arguing with you about should I have this or
Yep.
not. They're going to make you the villain, and they're going to say they're holding me back.
Yep.
When you let people make that, and I think it's so important, like I want my kids to know, because this was something I think like my generation struggled so much with, was the guilt and shame of not doing exactly what your parents think and not believing what your parents believe or disagreeing with how they parent. And I want my kids to feel safe doing that so that our relationship is closer.
Yeah.
I don't want my kids to feel guilty if they have some, if they parent differently than I do, or have some critique of the way that I parented or whatever. I want them to like, you know, completely feel comfortable talking to me. I will embrace that.
Yep.
I'm not going to listen while she's 7, but when she's 37, 100%, I am not going to guilt her or shame her or make her think that she should do the things the way that I do them, or she should think the way that I think. I
Right.
definitely
And
want
I
my
really
kids to
do
know.
feel like that's something new to the
Yeah.
scene because 15, 20 years ago, I mean, I specifically remember my mom like, well, you can't do it that way. If you do it that way, then she's gonna, and I'm like, this is my child, I can, and I am going to try it this way, and if it doesn't work, I do remember what you said, but in my mind I'm like, that doesn't seem like it's going to match up for her, so now,
And it's
and
almost
I
like it's offensive to them if you don't take
100%.
the, and it's like, I don't, that creates tension in the relationship with them. And I want to have a good relationship with my adult kids. I want to
Yeah.
work through that kind of stuff.
100%. So somebody who's listening, because I know people are definitely walking away with an explosion of things that they're going to be thinking about and able to try on and all of that. But boundaries, I think, is such a big thing for women. I'm not a man, so I can't really say it isn't for men, but for
True.
women, I really feel like
I agree.
I get that a lot. Like, how do I have boundaries? How do I
Hmm.
put the boundaries up when I am a people pleaser or when I
Hmm.
just don't like to ruffle feathers? There's a lot of not, I don't like to ruffle feather type people, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. But boundaries are so important. And my take is always the boundaries in which you set in place are for your health, your wellness, and your well-being. And if the boundary makes sense and is going to add value to that journey for you, then I see it as a good boundary. If
Hmm.
it is a boundary that's going to make you feel stressed out and sad and all the other things, and it's not really aligning with where you want to go, then that's a
Hmm.
boundary you might want to talk out with somebody. Or
Right.
so what is your take on, like, just one or two steps people can do if they're thinking about setting a boundary
Mm.
with another person?
So
I think that's
the
different.
number one, I think, thing is give them permission to be upset. Give them permission
Mm,
to be upset with you. Give them permission to disagree, and give them permission to care. Like, they'll care if they want to, they'll respect it if they want to, and just release it. Give them permission to do whatever they want to do. That's the number one thing I think is so important. People will care if they want to. And then the second thing is allow yourself to process the suffering and the discomfort. So find a way, recognize that when you disappoint somebody or when you put out down a boundary, somebody might be upset with you. Find a way to process that and prepare the way to process that before you set the boundary. So tell yourself, okay, I'm going to get upset or I'm going to feel really bad. So I'm going to go journal about it right after, or I'm going to go have a dance party right after, or I'm going to go call my best friend, whatever it is. Like think of a plan so that you can manage your suffering after you've set the boundary, because that's the part where we want to take it back. As soon as the suffering starts, we're like, never mind. If you want the boundary to stick, give them permission to be disappointed and give yourself a process to manage the suffering.
I love that. I love that. And I think those are things I've not thought of yet. And I think that is so important because there have been times where I have created boundaries for my own wellness, but that suffering stinks and it really is
Yeah.
hurtful to your inside. And I've never thought about thinking ahead, like what can I do to release that, or what can I do to get rid of that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm even thinking prior to doing whatever it is that you're going to put as a boundary. For me, I probably would journal or actually think through things now that you're saying that, because it makes such sense,
Mm-hmm.
before I actually do it, to talk through
Yep.
scenarios so that I'm set up better to handle what.
That's exactly what I do. And in my boundary setting workbook, there's a whole section on journaling, because that is such a massive part of processing events and processing discussions, is that we kind of unravel the script in our mind of how we want things to play out and then how they did play out. And then we can, you know, allow ourselves to manage whatever feelings come out of it.
Yeah, I love that. And often I hear like, oh, I don't like to journal, like journaling's not my
Hmm.
thing. And my thing to people when they say that is it might not be your thing, but you should at least give it a go,
Hmm.
because I think that a lot of people that are resistant to it truly need it,
Yeah.
because it's not that you have to write a log, and write to a prompt. That's another thing. I like
Hmm.
to give people permission to just sit down and throw up whatever it is that's on their mind. It does not have to be like read a prompt and answer the prompt. Sometimes that is work and that is
Hmm.
manageable and that is good, but there are a lot of times where if we just sit and, some people call it morning pages, I call it morning throw up, it's just get out whatever it is that's been on your mind, because when you
Hmm.
get that out of your mind and you write it, something happens. There's like connection, like brain, writing connection that helps you filter it out. And
Yeah.
so I really think that's so important,
And I
to
think that
know.
one of the things that people struggle with about the journaling, and why I think so many people struggle to get started, is because they have been conditioned to ignore their feelings and to ignore their needs. And so
Mhm.
when they go to address their feelings or needs, it triggers a fight or flight response. And so they stop and they go, I have nothing to think of. I have nothing to say. So when somebody has been conditioned to ignore their feelings and needs, or other people have, neglected them, or they've experienced emotional abuse, journaling and sitting down to journal can feel like, climbing a mountain. It can feel completely overwhelming. So what I recommend to break through that wall is, when you have a triggering moment, something happens where, like, maybe your boss was mean to you, or somebody was weird in the drive-through, and you're wicked angry, and like that's a moment that you normally would, call your friend to complain about it, or that's a moment where you might text your husband and say what's going on. Instead of doing that, instead of reaching out to somebody else to process it, open up the notes app on your phone and write out everything that happened. And then later that day, go back and read what you wrote, because that's when we're already in the fight or flight mode, it's not going to deter us away from taking the action. But if somebody is not already in the frame of accessing their feelings and they've experienced emotional abuse or neglect, they struggle to break through that kind of glass. And they're like, what do I write in the journal? What am I trying to pull out? I don't know what I'm trying to say. So to get into a journaling practice, instead of going to somebody else to vent, keep it in your phone and try to start keeping the notes that way and reviewing them.
I like that. And I also say, it's giving permission to not be structured. It's giving permission to just
Yes.
truly write what is happening within yourself. And that's like the throwing up part of it. I know it's a terrible word,
Yeah.
but it's
I
just,
love brain dumps. That's like, I do that so
yeah,
much.
it's just like whatever it is that's on your mind, even though it could seem so minuscule, it is taking bandwidth in your brain for
Mm-hmm.
you, not only the space, but also it then kind of triggers how you respond to things. And it's a whole like cycle of things. So if you could just get it
Right.
out onto paper. And again, for people who, aren't big journalers right now,
Mm-hmm.
you know, take the pressure. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to
No.
be in all the fancy colors. It doesn't have to be a journal that's, a $30 journal. Get a spiral notebook piece of paper that's just plain and just kind of jot. It's like scribble. It doesn't have to be. And I think again, that's that perfectionism. Like, well, I
Yes.
see people journaling and it's like they have all the pens and the whatever. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
but the other thing I often tell people is if that is still not where you are quite yet, record yourself. Just open your
Oh,
voice
yes.
memo
Voice
and just
memos. Mm-hmm.
and instead of calling that friend, like you said, to complain,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
talk to yourself and kind of say everything that you would want to say to the person or to yourself or to whatever. Give it some time, go back and
Exactly.
listen. And that actually helps, again, those knee jerk impulsive reactions.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of see what your thought process is also. So I think,
And practice
again,
validating yourself, because that's something we
exactly.
have to do so much, is validate our own feelings. And it can be hard, especially when you're, something I used to struggle with was when I was working in an office and I would have a problem at work and I would come home and tell my husband and he'd start rattling off advice and I'd be like, I don't need your advice. Like, I just need somebody to hear me and
Space.
see me get why I'm so upset, and so it's so helpful. We can't control the way people want to respond or help us.
Right,
And
right.
so I can't control that my husband wants to give me advice and fix it for me. But if I need to validate my own feelings, I can take that, to my journal and I can practice telling myself, like, it makes sense you felt that way. Of course you felt that way, and validating our own feelings it's such a powerful practice.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's funny you say that about your husband because I think men tend to be more fixers. They just want to give
Yeah.
you a solution. They want to, but
Yeah.
I also feel like that is there that always, or for me, that has come up often so that I can say to my husband, I love you for wanting to solve it, but right now I just need you
Just need
to
an
just,
ear.
right. And so let me just kind of vent.
Yep.
And then if I ask you for a solution, you can tell me your idea, but it's like a lot
Exactly.
of times that's the last thing we want to hear as we're just sort of venting. But
Yeah.
then I have learned sometimes what he has to say are things I don't want to hear
So
because
much.
I don't want to hear it because then that means that I have to shift. And so there is kind of the common, they're there for a reason. That's what I always say. Like my husband's
Yes,
there
and
to
that's what my
articulate.
husband's like. The way he sees me is like nobody else. He was like the person that told me to start my podcast. He was the one that encouraged me to become a
Yeah,
freelance writer. He
yeah,
sees me just so clearly. And so it is hard. It's hard to hear him
right. It's a
give a
mirroring.
reflection. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, it is. It's often accurate, but
It is.
sometimes I'm not ready for it, and that's okay. I can
That's true.
wait.
That's right. That's right. But also, I think one thing that I love that my husband, he's just like, let's zoom out. Is that really a big deal?
My husband says that
Like it,
exact thing. You're
like
zooming in too
you're
much.
making it into more than it really is. And sometimes
Yep.
I'm like, you're right. It's like, yeah, I know, but it's like, this is how I feel. But that to me, then I'm like,
Funny.
no, because that's how I used to be, and it's like, okay,
Yep.
thank you for bringing that to my attention. And the last thing I wanted to mention, just really quick before I ask you about your non-negotiables, when you were talking about the upstream versus the downstream of empathy, I think
Hmm.
that's really important. And what I want people to understand is you're not necessarily saying discount everything that your parents did, discount
Right.
whatever you came from. You're just saying to place the empathy piece on yourself. And that to me talks a lot about what I've learned about trauma. And so with trauma, it is not necessarily the event in which you are trying to undo or trying to work through. It is actually the
Hmm.
feelings and the message and the energy and all the stuff you got from that trauma that you actually carry, because you don't really carry the incident, you carry the emotional baggage of whatever happened during the
Right.
incident. And when that kind of resonated with me is being in a family of three children, and how each of us have gone through maybe some of the same, obviously you go through the same experience, but how each one takes that experience and
Hmm.
has lived it so differently and has taken away, and you're like, really, that bothers you? Because that didn't bother me, and it's
Hmm.
just because that's not what I took from that, but you
Yep.
took that. So I think it's so important for people to understand that the empathy piece is really for yourself. It is
Hmm.
really to allow yourself to place the empathy, to allow yourself to grow, I
Hmm.
guess, because you can't grow when you're stuck.
Right.
So,
And people that experience that kind of emotional dismissal or gaslighting or neglect or abuse, they get caught in this introjection projection cycle where we will introject the misbehaviors and the toxic behaviors of the older person, and we will project our innocence onto them. And as you
mm-hmm,
grow, and this is happens in adulthood, it happens
mm-hmm,
at every stage of life, as you grow, you think that whoever you're dealing with only knows as much as you know. So when you're 7, you think that your parents only know as much as you know. When you're 12, you think your parents only. So when you're remembering yourself being 12, you're kind of equalizing yourself to your parents. And it's so
interesting.
important that we separate that introjection projection, and just recognize that we are projecting innocence onto them because we were possessing innocence at the time. We were literally not of any experience. We were, just
Mm-hmm,
a couple of years into the world, not aware. They 20, 30, 40 years our senior had that much awareness behind them. And so it's not appropriate to equalize our awarenesses. And so to keep the empathy with yourself and along your own trajectory, it's important to remember that, they had that bank of awareness that you didn't have, and don't project your innocence onto them. Remember that they're not innocent, you are. And it's so important. Like, I need to remember that my kids are innocent. When my daughter colors on the wall with markers, like, of course I could be like, yeah, and you scream at her, but she doesn't understand why I value the wall. She really doesn't. She has no idea what any of that means. So it's super innocent. And so we just have to remember that introjection projection cycle that happens, and turn it backwards. Keep the empathy on yourself.
Yeah,
And I think
I love
that's,
that.
yeah.
I love that. And that's a great message to leave with, because I think we all need that reminder, because we are all critics and hard on ourselves. So
Yeah.
I love that. So before we wrap up, two things. Where can people find you? Which
At
obviously this
the
is all going to be in the show notes, but go ahead.
yeah. At the middaylatte.com, that's my website. That's where people can sign up to my newsletter, find my socials, and I load my podcast episodes up there. My podcast is called The Pursuit of You, and season 2 is actually launching December 12th. So that's next week.
Yay.
Yay. And then my socials are Joscelyn Kate. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook.
Very good. And I heard you say you had a workbook.
Yes, my boundary setting workbook. That is like my whole recovery packaged into one book. And it literally walks through the mindset shifts, the practices, the actual daily practices, the things to say, like how to talk to your family, how to set boundaries in new relationships, how to set boundaries in existing relationships, because those are two different things. And it has really all of the practical tools so that people can continue revisiting the practice of setting boundaries.
Love it. Okay. So, and we'll drop that link in the show notes also.
Awesome. Yeah, great.
Okay. All right. So before we wrap up, I obviously my podcast is Live Life Balanced. It's about 1% shifts. It's about creating non-negotiables. And so I love to ask each guest that comes on for one or two, whatever resonates with you, kind of non-negotiables you have created for yourself that you live on a daily basis to live your healthiest, most vibrant life.
So the first practice I implemented on my recovery journey was I would write a note to myself in the morning that would say, I don't know what's going to happen today, but I will let you know later. And then I would go back to that note at night and write 3 things that happened during the day. And this helped me to timestamp where I was living my life, because I was so caught in the past, living in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I was really missing the moments of each day. And then I was getting confused because, as we talked about the cruise ship thing,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going in erratic directions. I'm not accomplishing things. So as I started my recovery, that's what I did. I needed to build the self-trust. So I needed to admit the powerlessness. I don't know what's going to happen today. And then I needed to revisit it and say, these are the 3 things that happened today. I just wanted to let you know. So that built my self-trust back. It built my self-talk, and it helped me keep awareness of each day so that I was more right in the moments. So that is a practice I still do. 3 things that happened in the day, my highlights of the day. That's part of the 5-minute journal. So I would recommend that to anybody if you've never done that. And then the other thing that I do every day is yoga. It's like, it doesn't have to be an hour practice. It doesn't have to be, anywhere special. Like literally in my pajamas, in my kitchen, I will do 3 sun salutations.
And that is really, for me, yoga to me, which I know it's different for everybody, but the connection of breath to movement for
Mm,
me, like, just really helps me calm my nervous system.
mhm.
Um, the breathing
The body is
techniques.
the subconscious mind, and that's, you can align your conscious and your subconscious mind when you align your body and your mind.
Yeah. And back to your first thing, because I love that as well. And I think that's a good daily practice. But I also think, it's something great to do with your family. Like we
Mm.
always do a high and a low of the
Yeah, we
day,
love
but
at dinner. Yeah.
yeah, and we do the low, but the low turns into like, what opportunity can you get from that? So
Yep.
I try to really, and this is also just for me too, but it's like every challenge, it's trying to figure out and seeking the opportunity that could come out of it. So I
Mhm.
think I love that by stating those 3 things every day, you are living in the moment, right? You are training yourself to that awareness. And I think that's
Mhm.
so important. So if you're leaving with nothing else from this amazing episode, just telling yourself every day, 3 things that you've learned or that have come
Mhm.
to fruition throughout your day will really keep you in the present moment. So I love
Mhm.
that. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on. I know we could keep talking, I think, forever, and I'm
I
sure that I'll
know.
have
This
you
is
back
such a
on
great talk.
another time because I'm sure we'll come up with many more things that I would love to kind of hear your take on because
That'd be
we
awesome.
seem really aligned. So, all right,
Yeah.
everybody that is listening, thank you so much for tuning in today. Everything obviously will be in the show notes, and please connect and follow Joscelyn on her accounts. Give her some love and some support, and also learn from her because I think she's super wise. So, until next time, we will talk to you guys later.
Thank you.